This is the culmination of years of training.
Three, two, one, go! Hello, fellow people of the digital world. Jenny Blaze here. I'm not doing an accent this time because between the vampire video and now, I got sick. Yay. So if I sound a little bit scraggly today, that's the main reason why. So either way, welcome back to Monstober. Last time we talked about vampires, and so this week we're going to be talking about the witches. And honestly, I love witch aesthetics. Like, it looks so cool, just the cool hat, and the amazing dress, and just, they always look really cool looking. I mean, even those people who are not identified as witches, you know, have that witch aesthetic. You look at Eno from Guilty Gear, you look at Nine the Phantom from Blaze Blue, and, you know, even witches like Marissa, like, they rock that witch sort of thing. Marissa from Toho, as a note. But anyways, but all things considered, I don't really have a lot to talk about this video, so it's probably gonna be a shorter one, mainly because A, I'm sick and I want to get this done as quickly as possible, but at the same time, I love to talk, so we'll see how it goes. And also, there's not a lot of classical witch literature to go off of. I can't really dive into the origins just like Dracula did. And I mean, that's not to say there weren't other witches, because we have stuff like Macbeth with the three witches there who tell Macbeth of his fate. Oh, I love Macbeth. It's such a fun Shakespeare play. I love it. And, of course, you know, we could argue that the Grey Sisters from Greek mythology are also witches, but we don't really see a lot of, like, witch protagonists until, like, the 21st century, essentially. And when we do see witches be portrayed, there's not a lot to them. One thing that I wanted to watch was the movie Hocus Pocus, which everybody seems to really love the three witches there. And I'm sure they have a lot more personality than I'm giving them credit for, but, you know, every time I see them, they're just kind of the villains, and they're just kind of maniacally evil. And while I do love myself a good evil villain, you know, just like, I mean, I praise Carmilla for that, I can't really do too much outside of that, of saying, oh, they are really good villains. Now, admittedly, I have not seen Hocus Pocus. I'm sorry. I should see Hocus Pocus, and I was going to, but then I got sick, and you know how motivation kind of takes a downturn when you feel like you're dying. But there is one that I can think of that had really interesting stuff, and it was the movie Stardust. Honestly, I would highly recommend this movie, because I always just find it really fun, and I find the witch lore really interesting here, of basically that they feed off of stars to survive, and it's just overall a fun movie. Like, I highly recommend it. I remember watching it as a kid, and I really enjoyed it. Like, if you haven't seen this movie, definitely, like, give it a shot, because it's just so cool, and it's definitely one of Neil Gaiman's best works. I personally just really love Stardust. It's such a good thing. It's such a good movie. But, yeah. But that does make me want to delve into a bit of, like, the interesting bit of magic that's in witches, you know? Like, that they either make a deal with Satan, or that they're passed down from a witch's bloodline. And I always find it interesting how magic kind of gets passed on, because, you know, there's different ways that magic happens in stories. You know, you learn magic through studying for it, through knowledge, or it's passed down through a magical bloodline, in a sense. Or the way that witches usually have their magic given to them is through a blood pact, essentially. And admittedly, you know, I do think that there is more interesting ways than just having, you know, deal with the devil sort of thing. Not that a deal with the devil can't be interesting, but I do think that there are more interesting ways of doing witches rather than, oh, you have your soul tied to a demon and stuff like that. But we'll be getting to demons later in the month. But I always just find it interesting how magic kind of gets passed down. Like, one example is this series that I remember watching with my father called Legend of the Seeker. And it's basically that you have the main character of this TV show that was initially a book series that I learned was 21 books long. Jeez. I personally really enjoyed the show. I remember watching the show with my dad, and it was a good time. But I remember the protagonist of the show, Richard Cypher, basically getting magical bloodline through two sources. There was his grandfather, Zedekis Zul Zarander. I cannot believe I remembered the name there. But also from his father, who is also the father of the big bad, Darken Ral. I believe that his father's name is Panis Ral. If I butchered that, I'll post an edit in the editing. But I do find it interesting of, like, these two powerful magical bloodlines kind of in this one character who kind of just uses a sword. You know, that's kind of just his whole thing, is just he uses a cool sword. I don't know, it's been a while since I've seen the series, so there's that. But either way, let's get to the topic of witches, like, instead of getting to the topic of magic, because that's a whole rabbit hole that I could go down elsewhere. And I'll probably go down another time. But there are 3 TV shows, or, well, 3 sources that I can think of that kind of have an interesting way of doing witches, essentially. The first one I want to talk about, and I'm just going to talk about it briefly, is Cardfight Vanguard, my favorite card game of all time. I love this game a lot, and it has quite a few witches. And honestly, this card game has a special place in my heart, especially when it comes to the witches, because, so, a lot of you know that I cosplay, and recently, at SakuraCon last year, or, well, this year, time is weird, I was working in the tabletop gaming room, and I ended up doing my own OC cosplay for it, the Witch of Fate Decima, who was essentially a Cardfight Vanguard OC that I made, basically to show people the game of Cardfight Vanguard and stuff like that. But yeah. And for those who are watching Linkara's Long Box of the Damned, you might see this Witch of Fate show up in there somewhere. Haha, hint hint, wink wink. We'll see if Linkara actually puts my video in there, because I did a submission, but we'll see how it goes! Ugh. Wasn't lying about being sick. I don't know if I'll cut that one out or not. Anyways. So, Cardfight Vanguard, it honestly has 3 different aspects of witches. You have your classical dark witches and the Shadow Paladins, and I really love the sort of gothic aesthetic that they have. Kind of mixing together, like, Victorian Gothic, the regular Gothic movement, and, you know, witches. And honestly, I feel like there is a precedent to kind of, like, goths kind of being inextricably linked with witches, because a lot of, like, witchy wear kind of matches with the blacks of, like, goth wear. And honestly, I kind of really like that sort of aesthetic when you have, like, modern witches looking, like, basically very goth looking. And I can think of one good reason why that happened, and it's mainly because of the movie Scooby-Doo and the Witcher's Ghost, which I did actually end up watching, so at least there's that. But in the characters of the Hex Girls, I really love how they look. They are all really cool and stuff. And honestly, they're very hot. But yeah, the Shadow Paladin witches, and they have a lot of sort of Welsh names to them, matching sort of like the mysterious Welsh magic users of old. Like, for example, there's Nemain, or, you know, not a witch in its own right, but there's characters like MacLear, who is... Shadow Paladins kind of have a lot of those sort of Welsh names, compared to their light counterparts, the Royal Paladins, who have more, Arthurian names for their characters. But then again, there's no more clans anymore, so who knows what the parallels that they make nowadays are. Cardfight Vanguard has gone through a very interesting history. But then we have Oracle Think Tank and Genesis, and Genesis, I feel like they play sort of the white witch, you know, the Glinda the Good, essentially. While still using the witch aesthetic, they are more white compared to black, essentially, and I do find that interesting, but I don't find it as interesting as how the sort of gothic witches are in the Shadow Paladins, in a sense. And then, of course, we have the witches from Oracle Think Tank, which... they kind of remind me of Dark Magician Girl and the other Fruit Magician Girls. Overall, spellcasters are just a big thing in card games, and I guess that's just kind of how it goes. But yeah, that's kind of my main thing that I wanted to talk about with Cardfight Vanguard. Only wanted to briefly delve into that. The main ones that I want to talk about, we'll start off with good old Bayonetta, because I love me some Bayonetta, and I really love her design. And one thing I found interesting is that witches apparently use their hair a lot in casting spells, or at least that's how it was said in old folktales. And so having Bayonetta be this witch who kind of, you know, basically uses her hair for different attacks, and like that basically she has a hair bodysuit, I find that whole thing interesting, even if it's a little weird, to be honest. I mean, that she basically uses her long hair to basically summon up portals from hell to summon up demons, which, you know, kind of has the whole demon contract, essentially. And I just really love Bayonetta as a character. There's not too much to her there's not too much to her besides her being a total badass and just being this fun, sort of sexy character. And, you know, admittedly, that's a small fault in the writing, is that there's not much to Bayonetta besides her being, like, this kick-ass, flirtatious witch girl who will shoot first and then be a pretty face later. I don't know. This is the consequences of being unscripted, guys, is that I can't figure out the ways to describe her. But I mean, besides her whole story with Cereza and her little flirtatiousness with Luca, she's kind of a blank slate. And maybe that changes in Bayonetta 3, and I mean, of course, Bayonetta 2 has her relationship with Jean, but, like, there's not much to Bayonetta behind the eyes, but that doesn't make her not be one of my favorite characters, because it's that sass, it's that panache, you know? It's similar to what I praised about Carmilla, about being a good evil villain. There's something about being this suave, kick-ass hero that just kind of has people kind of revolve around you and stuff. And even then, Bayonetta still has her flaws to her, and she still has her moments of compassion. For example, like with Cereza and like that whole thing there. It's like, I really like Bayonetta as a character. I just think that she's just very fun and interesting. And let's be honest, you see a kick-ass girl with guns and you're just like, oh, heck yeah. But that's not what I want to talk about, and admittedly, the whole reason why I chose witches is mainly so that I have an excuse to talk about Owl House. Y'all saw it coming, y'all knew that that's the main thing I wanted to talk about was Owl House here, and I absolutely love Owl House. I love the Boiling Isles as a setting, and I find that just the characters are really cool. And one thing that I really enjoy about Owl House is mainly the magic system, because I find it really fun and interesting how basically they use the magic circles and in order to summon up their magic, and that there's basically a lot of lore explanation kind of dumped into Owl House as to how things go. I do find it interesting how essentially that Belos basically splits it up into the 9 coven system, as it does make for good compartmentalizing rather than just like, you know, doing this whole pure magic thing, but at the same time I feel like it does kind of limit the magic in Owl House, but then again, it's not the only thing that limits magic in Owl House, as the glyphs, I'm sorry, but I never really understood why there was 4 glyphs in general. It's like, okay, we have light, which makes sense because our main character is named Luce. We have plant, which I guess makes sense. We have fire, and then we have ice. And it's like, why those? Why not lightning as well? Or maybe light fills in for lightning? I always just find this so weird. I always find the glyphs very restricting of why it's those 4 elements in a sense. Like, if it was fire, ice, lightning, and then some other 4th thing, it would make sense, like fire, ice, lightning, and earth. But, I don't know. Maybe I think that light might be like a stand-in for air, and then plant is a stand-in for earth. I don't know. I just find it a weird sort of thing of, and I'm sure that somebody's explained the glyph system and why it actually works the way it does. And this is just a small critique of one of my favorite TV shows of all time, but that's mainly because I really love the characters, and I love how the world works of basically you have the witches, and that witches can use magic from a magic battle sack that they have, and that they gain a familiar known as a palisman, in which I love all of the palismans, even if I can only really name, you know, certain ones by name. Mainly there's like String Bean, Flapjack, Ghost, mainly because Amity said Ghost's name. I didn't even know what Clover's name was until I found a Willow cosplayer, and she told me that Willow's palisman was named Clover. Oh, and I can't forget Albert. We can't forget Albert. We love Albert. But yeah, I think that this kind of segues into me talking about my favorite character in Owl House, and that is Ida the Owl Lady. Because, you know, while we can talk about the coven system and all of these different witches, you know, let's talk about the witch who kind of, like, denies all of that stuff. Ida. Because Ida is just so much fun. She's like the cool old mentor that I would love to be when I, you know, get to her age, of just kind of never really losing my spark and, you know, being this kind of chill person who's like, you know, I do the things that I want to do and I'm not going to have anybody tell me how to do them and stuff like that. Like, Ida just immediately kind of I gravitated towards, because I love her sass, I love her relationships with Luce and King and her own sister, as she basically has her own way of speaking when it comes to each of them, but at the same time it's still very Ida. And it's like, she really it seems like she's uncaring at first, but she really grows to care for Luce. And when we get to see those parts of her backstory where we're like, we really feel for her as a character. She's a really well-rounded character. And I think that's kind of like a definite inversion from all these witches, of that you have these witches who are very self-assured and cackling and stuff. Whereas Ida, she's not really that self-assured. She's a very flawed character. she has a lot of things that she's ashamed of, and a lot of skeletons in her closet, you know? And it's like, whenever she's interacting with her past, that's one of the best moments for her, is getting to see her past, getting to see her reconciling with her family, getting to see her reunite with her loved one. Like, Ida and Rain are just such a beautiful couple, and Ida's Requiem just, oh, it tugs at my heartstrings every time, and just, I'm so happy that in the end, Ida gets to live, you know, her life free and feeling like she belongs, you know? Getting to teach other witches the way that things are meant to go. Not having to deal with the coven system, and just living her own life, essentially. Like, Ida definitely is a really great character, and it's one of the characters that I definitely aspire to be like. I think that's basically it. This has basically been a very disorganized ramble. I don't know how editing's gonna go, both for audio editing and getting visuals for this. Admittedly, this is one of the ones where it was kind of a filler sort of thing, because I knew I wanted to talk about vampires, and then at the end of the month, well, I have my thing that I'll talk about, which is, I mainly just love for the aesthetic, and also just kind of, it's more about the characters that portray the witch rather than the witch itself. And yeah. Either way, come back next week as we celebrate my birthday, and let's talk about something that I kind of tie my identity to. But anyways, until next time, folks, this is the Tiefling of Trouble, Jenny Blaze, saying, shine on, ghoulies and ghoulettes!